Hello children, Force and Pressure, Class 8, Subject Science, Chapter 7, and this is the part 1. So what is force and what does it do? So let's talk about force in today's class. The state of motion of an object is described by its velocity, its magnitude called speed, and its direction. So what do you mean by state of motion, children? Which means whether an object is at rest or whether it is under motion is described by state of motion. So if there is a change in state of motion, which means either the object from rest started to move or an object which is moving comes to rest. Is it clear, children? So the state of motion of an object is described by its velocity. So if the velocity is 0, then we say that the object is at rest. If the velocity is constant, that is not varying with respect to time, then the object is in uniform motion in a straight line moving at constant speed. So now, what do we mean by force? So force is the physical quantity that changes the state of motion of an object, including its state of rest. Which means what? When you apply a force on an object, it either starts to move from rest or it stops. We'll discuss about all these things in today's class. Okay, so force can also be defined as a push or pull on an object. Okay, which means either you can push an object or pull an object, right? So to pull an object, you have to apply a force. Clear? So hence any change in velocity vector can happen only if there is a net force acting on the object. So effect of a force on an object. So what all things happen when a force is being applied on an object? Okay, so number 1, a force can move a stationary object. So what do you mean by stationary, children? Stationary means the object which is at rest is stationary object. Okay, stationary means no movement. Okay, so what happens when you apply a force, it can move a stationary object, which means if an object is at rest, then it starts to move. So example is when we kick a football kept at rest, it starts moving. Yes or no? Okay, and the second effect is a force can stop a moving object. Okay, which means example when a goalkeeper collects the football, it comes to rest. Okay, so the football was under motion. Then what happens when the goalkeeper collects the football, it comes to rest. So a force can move a stationary object or a force can stop a moving object. And the third point is a force can change the speed of a moving object, which means already it is under motion, so you can change the speed, either increase or decrease. So when we press the accelerator of a vehicle, it starts moving faster. Right? So these are the 3 effects. And what about the 4th effect? So the 4th effect is a force can change the direction of motion of a moving body. So as you all can see in the picture, a batsman changes the direction of motion of a moving ball by hitting it with the bat. Yes or no? Other than push, pull, hit also comes into picture. Right? So a force can change the direction. And 5th effect is a force can change the shape of an object. So a pull or press a spring. You all know, no? The spring expands and can't. Yes or no? Okay. So when we try to move an object, stop a moving object or change the direction of motion or change the shape of an object, we have to apply some effort, and this effort, which may be in the form of a push, a pull or a hit or with no contact, is called as force. Have you all understood, children? Now exploring forces. 2 objects must interact for a force to come into play. An interaction of one object with another object results in the force between them. So the net force of an object is 0 if the 2 forces acting on it in opposite directions are equal. So a change in either the speed of an object or its direction of motion or both is described as change in its state of motion, as I have already explained, right? A force is needed to change the state of motion or change its shape or both. right? So what do you understand by the second point? Net force on an object is 0 if the two forces acting on it in opposite directions are equal. Example, when you try to push a table, okay, you think that two persons are standing in opposite direction and they are applying same force, okay, in opposite directions, then what happens? The net force that is acting on that table is 0. Hence the object will not move. Hence the table will not move. Clear? Now, next, let's discuss about the types of forces. So we have two types in that, contact force and non-contact force. So under contact force, we have muscular and frictional force, and non-contact force, we have magnetic force, electrostatic force, and gravitational force. So what do you mean by contact force? Contact means what? Contact means in touch with the object. Okay, so the forces experienced by bodies when they are in physical contact with each other is said to be contact force. So what do you mean by muscular force? Muscular means what? The force due to the action of muscles. When you use your muscle power in order to push or pull an object, then it is called as muscular force. Here you can see a man tried to push a car, right? So he is using his muscle power, hence this is a muscular force. And he is touching the car. Therefore, it is a contact force. Clear, children? Next comes the frictional force. So, frictional force is nothing but the force acting opposite to the direction of motion, which means when you are pushing from left to right, the friction force will be from right to left. Clear? Okay, even here the object is in touch with the ground, therefore, it is a contact force. Now coming to non-contact force, it is the opposite of contact, which means the objects will not touch each other. Okay, so the forces experienced by bodies, even if they are not in physical contact with each other, is said to be non-contact force. So the three types of non-contact forces are magnetic force, electrostatic force, and gravitational force. So what do you mean by magnetic force? Magnet. You all are aware of magnet, right? So when you keep a north and south pole, what happens? It attracts each other. When you keep the same poles, that is either the south-south or the north-north poles, what happens? It repels each other. Yes. So when you try to keep a north and a south pole, so what happens? You will not make that magnet to touch each other. You will keep it at some distance, right? Even though they are not touching each other, they attract each other because of the magnetic force. Right? So the force exerted by a magnet is called as magnetic force. Next come the electrostatic force. So what do you mean by electrostatic? Can you all see the example here? So what is there? Comb is there and the pieces of paper are there. So when you comb your hair and when you keep that comb near the pieces of paper, it gets attracted. So this is the force which is behind this is electrostatic force. So now what is the definition of an electrostatic force? The force exerted by a charged body on another charged body or uncharged body is called as electrostatic force. Next comes the gravitational force. So it is nothing but the attractive force exerting between two objects. You all are aware of the Newton's, yes or no? So what did he do when he was sitting under the apple tree? The apple fell, and because of that he could give us about the gravitational force. He could tell us about the gravitational force. Types of force: pushing, pulling or hitting objects exert a force and change their state of motion. Example, the man pushes the cart, the zip needs to be pulled to close the jacket, the pull of gravity keeps us on earth. To start the hockey game, the ball is hit with the hockey stick. Yes or no? So pushing, pulling or hitting on an object is called as a force. Next comes the balanced force and unbalanced force. So balanced force means when you have the same force acting in opposite directions. Example, see, in a game of tug of war, when two teams pull it with equal effort, the rope and the two teams remain stationary, which means they will not move. It is called balanced force, which means both the side the forces are balancing, which means same force is being applied, equal force is being applied in both the direction. Hence it is balanced force, which means in such case what happens? The objects will not move. So what happens in case of unbalanced force? If any team in a tug of war game, if any team pulls that harder, then what happens? The one team will move towards the other. So this is called unbalanced force. So when one of the team pulls the rope harder, then both teams move in the direction of the greater force. So this is called unbalanced force. So what did we study? We have studied about the change in the state of motion, force, and what are the effects of force and the types of force. Right, children? Please try to answer all these questions. Thank you, children.